Hi, I'm Chris from Airwindows, and I'm going to see whether I can't be kind of quick this time. Firstly, because I'm being asked, stop doing stuff so often, I'm still trying to learn how to use Console 6. And because there's an enormous thunderstorm going on outside. So hopefully I can record before the power goes out or my house gets struck by lightning or something. I shouldn't joke, maybe that would happen. It would be terrible. Anyways, I have a plugin called PodcastDeluxe. And this is one of the ones that was left over from back when I was using Kagi as a payment processor. It was a commercial plugin. And it came along with a plugin called Podcast, but I have separated them out into two different products. So what PodcastDeluxe does is it's like a precursor to curve and recurve. It is a kind of compressor that brings up gain or cuts back gain based on where the signal is in the waveform. So it acts kind of like an automatic gain control in that this is the kind of compressor that won't bring up silences rapidly. Instead, it'll try to adjust itself as it goes along. The idea was that it could be like a radio station style processor. And to make it be more of a radio station style of processor, PodcastDeluxe is the one that had ADClip on the end as a final loudness clipper and 5 stages of phase rotation, because it has 5 stages of compression. And that is something that it shares with Podcast that's coming next week. So basically, this is it's kind of like a compressor, limiter, loudinator, but it's a more heavily processed one than you usually get. And it's not trying to retain the sound, which is what I usually will be trying to do. Instead, this is trying to sort of reprocess and reshuffle the sound. And I'll show you. Here is a sound without PodcastDeluxe on it. And then if I turn it on, it should sound faintly different even just from turning it on. Like the air around the percussion stuff is a little different because of the phase rotation. And then we start making it louder. Now, one of the things that I did with it was this is altered from the original podcast quite a bit, because one of the things that frustrated me with that one was that it would just distort very hard, and it was hard to control. It was hard to manage. It was trying to do such aggressive processing. And I haven't made this one distortion free, but I've made it distort more interestingly. So here's what this bit sounds like when you turn it up a lot. Again, this is a kind of compression that's very similar to curve and recurve, but those are very clean and high fidelity. This is not so much high fidelity. It's going to sound like some kind of crazy radio station box, and it is pretty distorted in quality. Let me throw on something else that's also... So we have this weird sounding thing, and then if I turn it on here, you can clearly hear that it's loudinating that quite a lot, and it's changing the sound, but it's not necessarily changing the sound in a super negative way. It's a different tone, it's a different kind of processing. Unlike most of my compressors, because most of my compressors are trying to hang on to some sense of realism, And this one's got 5 bands of phase rotation going on in there. Complete over alliteration. Clean it up. So yeah. And of course, what you might want to hear a little bit of is what it sounds like on the crappy drum track. I will try to make better tracks for these eventually. It just takes me a long time because I'm working on the plugins first. Nobody's trying to get me to do drum tracks for them or music tracks for them or anything like that. So this always has to be secondary. Here we go. You can see that it's keeping basically the same balance, but it's a fairly similar tonality. And that is because of the way that it handles the compression. Again, this is 5 stages of compression, 5 stages of phase rotation. And it's a precursor to what curve and recurve do. So it's not just going to bring out quiet stuff. It's not going to have reverb come blooming up. And it's also not flattening out the front of the wave or the dynamics all that much. So we wind up getting a thing where you got raw signal, and then a fairly simpler behavior. It's acting kind of similar. And then if we turn it up even louder than that, we get a fairly decent sort of drum loudness maker. You compare it with the raw signal, and that's got a certain amount of mojo to it. And again, the phase rotation is going to be affecting that rather a lot. So that sounds a lot more realistic. And that's kind of heightened. Because the thing about it is, you don't have to use stuff like this for the thing that you could say it was designed for. If it's called PodcastDeluxe, and you know that it's a kind of compressor that doesn't swoop up background noise and has phase rotation, as if it was a broadcast processor for like talk and radio stations, that doesn't mean that has to be what it does in your mix. You can throw it on some kind of other bus or whatever. The takeaway from this one is, think of it as a kind of loudinator, sound flattener, alterer, but one that transforms more than just preserves the tone. This will take the sound and make it into something else, much like the bit crushers and things that you use for when you want like DRES or something, that you use for when you want your track to sound like it's coming off of old digital. Instead, this sounds kind of like old radio or something, and it is possible to smash stuff with it to some extent, but not like regular compressors, because regular compressors will smash stuff into the sort of, when the levee breaks, big roaring flatness, whereas this will retain the dynamics and impact of the drums and keep the silences quieter while it's doing that. So it can do that sort of thing. and that'll come through the mix harder, but it changes the sound too. And then we got weird noises. And we also got some serious thunder and lightning going on outside, so I think I might just be ready to bring this to a close. So, quickly, before I shut down the recording and stopped adding stuff to my hard disks and so on, while at a risk of losing power, Patreon, blah, blah, blah. This is how I keep doing this kind of stuff. It makes it possible for me to concentrate on this and have enough time to focus on it full time. Because people are like, oh, how can you possibly do so many plugins? Isn't this going to destroy you? It's like, well, this is my full-time job. That's what you get. That's what you get from me being on Patreon and being supported by people who are actually willing to get involved with that and sign up for it and pay me for it. Is this gets to be my full-time job. Otherwise, things might be different. So it's not that big of a strain, really. In any case, I'll get the heck off a line now, and I'll post this plugin tonight. And thank you very much. I'll talk to you guys later, and I hope you enjoy this new one. The one without voice rotation, which has a different sound, is coming soon. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.